Hi, I'm John Coles, the managing broker at KW Reston and Fairfax Gateway, and we are going over the MAR Property Inspection Addendum. So to start, we're putting in today's date, whatever that may be, and your buyer and seller names along with the property address should autofill in the form. If not, put in the buyer, seller, and the property address. Now, one thing to remember. In Maryland, you have one contract, and then everything is an addendum. So your financing would be an addendum, your home inspection would be an addendum. And the next wording, the following provisions are included in and supersede any conflicting language in the contract of sale. So this addendum uh, is what they go by when they're reviewing the contract. So number one, inspection contingency. Buyer and seller agree that buyer at buyer's expense shall have the right within, it might be 5 days, it might be 7 days, whatever you negotiate, from contract acceptance, the date of contract acceptance, here referred to as the deadline, to have qualified experts conduct those inspections listed below in paragraph sub A. And they need to be initialed by both the buyer and the seller. So both parties need to initial. So paragraph A says, inspection scope and limitations. The purpose of the inspection selected below is to discover unsatisfactory conditions, if any, of the components and systems of the property. The future condition and performance of the above systems and components are not warranted by the seller and are not to be considered subject to the addendum. So they are what they are on the day of the addendum. The inspections are not for the purpose of making items of routine maintenance and or cosmetic nature of the subject. Further negotiations between buyer and seller. So again, they are what they are. Down here, again, we can do any one of these inspections, structural and mechanical, mold, environmental, radon, chimney, lead-based paint, wood-destroying insect, and anything else. Usually you're not going to come up with anything else because it's pretty much covered under those first 7 items. So if they're doing a structural and mechanical, the buyer initials when they make the offer, and then the seller initials when they accept the offer. Now make sure you read the notes down here. The buyer's right to inspect and or test the well or septic systems, water quality or water yield shall be reserved through separate addenda. So there are separate addenda for well, septic, and water. If buyer intends to obtain financing through VA, again, Veterans Affairs, buyer retains the right to conduct an inspection for wood destroying insects at their expense pursuant to VA regulations that just changed recently in the last couple of years, notwithstanding the agreement of the parties stated herein. So paragraph B is the inspection process. After the inspection, the buyer has 3 options: the right to terminate, the right to negotiate, and the seller's response. So I'm sorry, they have 2 options: terminate or negotiate. The right to terminate, if the results are unsatisfactory to the buyer, and again, it could be unsatisfactory for any reason whatsoever. Buyer may terminate the contract of sale by delivering a unilateral notice of termination under the contract of sale to seller by the deadline. So within those 5 days that we said earlier, or whatever number you have put in. Buyer is not required to specify the basis of the dissatisfaction. So they don't have to say, oh, we don't like it because the kitchen sink is leaking. They just say, we don't like it. We don't want it. There's something in the inspection we don't like. Buyer's right to terminate the contract of sale as stated in the subsection paragraph expires at the deadline. So again, if they don't make a decision within those, say, 5 days, they're buying it. Or they have the right to negotiate. Instead of exercising the right to terminate, in 1B1, buyer may make a single written request for repairs and or seller credit based upon buyer's dissatisfaction with the results of the agreed upon inspection. This right will expire at the deadline unless buyer delivers to seller a copy of the inspection. So buyer needs to deliver a copy of the inspection report together with a written request that the seller make certain repairs and or agree to provide a seller credit. So within those 5 days, buyer needs to tell the seller what they want and give a copy of the report. The parties acknowledge that the buyer's lender may need to approve any agreed upon seller credit. Should the buyer attempt to deliver multiple written requests for repairs and or seller credit prior to the deadline, sellers shall only be obligated to consider the first such request received. So when we're going back to the seller to say, these are the things we want fixed, you only do one property inspection notice. And we'll talk about that in another video. The seller then has time to make a response. So within 5 days after buyer delivers the written request for repairs or seller credit, seller will notify the buyer in writing whether the seller agrees to all, some, or none of the buyer requests. So buyer has 5 days to do the home inspection. The seller has 5 days to get back to the buyer as soon as they receive the request. If seller agrees to all of the requested repairs and or seller credit, contract will remain in full force and effect as amended. If seller only agrees to some of the requested repairs or seller credit, or fails to respond within their 5-day period, buyer, by written notice to seller, given within 2 days of the receipt of seller's notice, or from the date that such written notice was to have been provided by seller, may elect to 1, terminate the contract, or 2, waive the requested repairs and or seller credits which seller will not agree, in which case the contract will remain in full force and effect. Or number 3, provided that the seller has responded to the buyer, continue negotiations by delivering a counteroffer to the seller in accordance with 1B4 of this addendum. So there's a couple things that happen here. So if the seller fails to respond within the 5-day period, so 5 days 5 days to do the home inspection, 5 days for the seller to respond. Within 2 days of the buyer receiving the seller's notice, the buyer can waive the repairs or continue negotiations. If buyer fails to timely notify seller of buyer's election to terminate the contract, to waive the right to repair or correct any unsatisfactory conditions, which seller will not repair, or submit a counteroffer, the contract remains in full force and effect. And the seller shall repair or correct in a good workmanlike manner prior to settlement of the unsatisfactory condition which seller agreed to repair or correct, or again, give the credit at settlement subject to lender approval. Now it falls on the buyer. Buyer shall confirm with the lender that the entire credit provided for herein may be utilized. If lender prohibits seller from payment of any portion of such credit, the credit will be reduced to the maximum allowed by the lender. So the lender can go in and really start changing the numbers and messing with the transaction. Number 4, we're talking about additional negotiations. Thereafter, within 2 days after the delivery of a counteroffer regarding the requested repairs or seller credit, the receiving party must deliver notice accepting the terms in the counteroffer, or deliver notice continuing negotiations, or deliver notice of termination of the contract. And we'll see this in the, they call it the PIN, property inspection notice. Remember, this is the addendum to the contract, and then there's also the property inspection notice. The failure of the receiving party to timely respond to any counteroffer shall constitute their automatic acceptance of that counteroffer, with all other terms remaining the same, full force and effect. Paragraph 5 is contract termination and deposits. If either party elects to terminate the contract in accordance with terms of the addendum, then the contract will become null and void, and all deposit monies will be dispersed in accordance with the deposit paragraph of the contract, which has already been discussed. Going back to, again, number 2, all of this was under number 1, inspection, scope, and limitations. Now we're going down to number 2, rights and obligations of buyer and seller. Seller needs to make the property accessible for the agreed upon inspections and have the utilities in service at the time of the inspection. Basically, have the utilities on, have everything up and running. Neither buyer nor any agent or contractor of the buyer shall in any way excavate, penetrate, or otherwise damage any part of the property without prior written consent of the seller. Nor shall any furnishings, boxes, or personal property belonging to the seller be moved or relocated unless absolutely necessary in connection with the inspection. So the inspector, agent, etc., is not punching holes in walls to see what's behind them. They might move a box or a basket to see what's behind it, but they need the written consent of the seller in order to do that. Again, unless absolutely necessary in connection with the inspection. If the property is part of a condominium, buyer will be given access to the common areas to perform inspections. Buyer and seller have the right to be present during the inspections. So buyer can be there, seller can be there, and buyer shall give seller reasonable advance notice of the date and time of the inspection. If buyer or buyer agents or contractors damage the property during the exercise of buyer's rights under this addendum, except for damage caused by seller's negligence, buyer will promptly reimburse seller for the costs incurred for the damage. So home inspectors are aware of this. They are very careful to leave the property in the same condition that they found it. Number 3, repairs, correction, and reinspection. The seller agrees to complete the repairs and provide receipts in sufficient time so that the buyer may reinspect the property prior to settlement. Buyer shall have the right to reinspect the property upon the completion of repairs or corrective action by seller to confirm the seller has performed in a good workmanlike manner all of the repairs and corrective actions that they agreed on. So buyer has the right to go back and double check that the seller did what they said they were going to do. With all the other addenda, all other terms and conditions remain in full force and effect and signed by the buyer and the seller. And that's it. This concludes the property inspection addendum. Make sure you watch the video for the property inspection notice, which is going to be coming up.